Morning. So this morning, I'm really pleased to be joined by Lisa Bond. Lisa, thank you ever so much for giving up your time to go through these questions this morning.
It's lovely to be here. Thank you.
So we've known each other for a long time, and I'm really excited to do this. And before we were chatting, preparing for the call, I think these processes are really interesting as well, because it sort of forces you to CMO now with a wealth of experience to kind of look back through all the things you've achieved along the way. So for people listening, to give a brief context, so Chief Marketing Officer, you've worked in a number of sectors, but including retail, FMCG, financial services, but there's a real breadth there of sectors that you've covered, and you've held some very big roles. So Group Marketing Director of Halfords, Chief Marketing Officer of Dreams, amongst others, and now are giving your expertise as interim and advisory to consumer-facing businesses. So thank you ever so much. If it's all right, can we sort of dive straight into the questions? Because I know you're gonna have some really good answers. But let's start, I guess, at the beginning by really an insight into your career. Would you mind sharing a bit about your career journey and any standout moments along the way?
Yeah, sure. So I studied at Leeds University. I wasn't sure, do I want to be a journalist? Do I want to work in the media? Do I want to do marketing? So I found a course which was really great because it was quite varied. So I learned about marketing, I learned about PR, I learned about journalism. So that was my kind of premise. I think prior to that, I wanted to be a lawyer. I wanted to be a lawyer and I wanted to be a barrister, but I couldn't afford to study for that long. I also want to be a newsreader as well, back in the day, probably when I was very young. But in those days, probably it wasn't that accessible from a small town where I lived. So I went to Leeds and I studied that degree, and it was all forms of communication basically. So, and covered the whole marketing mix. And I think that's where I was. It was a good opportunity to test different things. And I had a couple of work placements. One was at Help the Aged, which was in a PR role, which I absolutely loved. And another was in an advertising agency. So very different roles and different sectors. And I just thought I kind of found my niche in the PR and the comms side of things. So I very much started in PR and comms. I did a couple of roles, I suppose, really before I got to one of the more senior roles, when I was approached to join the National Lottery at Camelot. It just launched in the November, and then I was asked to go in-house and set up the whole PR and comms team. So it was very new. I think it was just a graduate at the time. And it was fantastic because it was the biggest news story. Nobody had done it before. And a huge learning curve. So as well as setting up a team, recruiting people, I was then responsible for all of the publicity around lottery winners. I was dealing with national newspaper editors every day. It was very early on in my career. So it was great. And I really enjoyed that. But I was part of a marketing team. And I always kind of had one eye on what's going on, what's happening over there. That's interesting. I quite like the idea of being more involved in, particularly in the advertising side in those days. So it kind of set the, I guess, the idea of me thinking about how I would broaden it. I think also one of the things I guess I found more frustrating in those days was it was more difficult to prove ROI, for PR and comms back in those days. And I wanted to be able to prove what I was doing, what I was delivering was really, contributing to the bottom line. So that was always in the back of my head. And I guess then I sort of, the next bigger role I had was at Licenza, where I worked with Theo Pavitas and his group of businesses. And that's probably really where the marketing side really came to interest me, because again, I was sitting in the marketing division, but I was focusing very much on PR and comms, and I was thinking, I think we can do more here. And it was interesting, so Theo sold the business, a new CEO came in, and I pretty much just pitched myself and said, look, I think we could be doing more. I think we should be doing this. I think we're underselling ourselves. And so the new CEO said, okay, show me how you'll do it. I'll give you 6 months and see what you can do. So I said, fine. I moved into the marketing director role, picked up all the team and stuff, and did some great things. And probably one of the greatest things, not great things, but standout things was, being able to negotiate a deal with the Pussycat Dolls, which was, they were in their heyday,
Yeah.
and going back a while. But, you know, to get them aligned to our brand and get them to see the benefits of, you know, of being part of our brand was really, really brilliant. So I really enjoyed that side of things. And it's probably in the days before e-commerce was really up and running. We had a website, but it wasn't transactional. So then I sort of moved a little bit more into the e-commerce section side of things when that started to catch up. And I was there for about 5 years, did lots and lots of different things, built the brand. And then I moved to Peacocks, which was based in Cardiff. Somebody approached me and said, you know, we're going through big transition. Would you come and help? So I went in and led a team of about 20, 25 people at Peacocks at a tricky time. You know, it was cost of living was, you know, causing lots of people lots of problems and stuff, but kind of reinvigorated that brand as well. Although it was a fashion brand which was very value driven, we really needed to improve the perception of it. So I did a lot of collaborations there with different designers to try and elevate the brand, and covered the whole sort of marketing mix and also e-commerce as well. I did that for a couple of years, and then I was approached by Dreams, which I suppose was a kind of defining moment in my career. Dreams had just come out of administration. A new executive team was brought on board by the private equity. I was asked to join as marketing and e-comms director, and yeah, so I joined a pretty new team. You know, we had new exec, we had a new CEO, and probably the main person that was still there was the CFO, so he had the longer term experience, and that was fascinating. It was a 5-year journey where we turned the business around from, you know, losing money to making really good profit, and eventually led to a sale. And did some, you know, I felt that I learned a huge amount. I took on a lot of things that I didn't really have the experience at the time, because it was one of those situations where people say, well, we need to do this, why don't you do it? And you know, there's no one else. So I was like, yeah, I'll have a go at customer services, or, you know, I'll do the company conference. And so I did all of those things, and it was really, really, you know, good for my experience. And then after the 5 years at Dreams, you know, I took a break, and then I was approached by Halfords to say, you know, we need somebody to come and bring the business together from a sort of the garage business and the retail business, and, you know, really build that team up. So I oversaw a team of about 45 people in Halfords, and a huge organization, obviously quite different from Dreams, but lots of similar challenges. And yeah, so, and in both, I suppose in both of those roles, some really key standouts would be, you know, just taking calculated risks, I guess, because when you're in a situation where you really need to elevate, you kind of have to be confident enough to go, right, we need to try this. And at Dreams, you know, one of the big campaigns was the Replace Every 8 campaign, which was hugely successful, which was a brand building campaign, never done in a big ticket business before. It's all about driving revenue. It's all about making sure we hit the bottom line weekly, but, you know, we knew we had to make that brand stand for something. So we developed this campaign, which was, you know, how you need to replace your mattress every 8 years. It was storytelling, it was brand building, it was purpose. And it was hugely successful, and probably contributed massively to the turnaround of the business. So very, very proud moment for myself and the team, really. And then similarly at Halfords, you know, I joined Halfords in January 2020, and then 6 weeks later we went into COVID. So I had 6 weeks to get to know 40 odd people, which was very challenging. And then the whole world turned upside down, and everything that we'd planned went out the window. So again, we really needed to, you know, navigate through COVID. Cycling was, you know, a natural, but we needed to build our motoring services business, because it was going to be needs-based businesses that were going to really survive. So we pivoted quite quickly. Yeah, and I did the first TV ad campaign for motoring services that, believe it or not, in the whole of Halfords history, they'd never done an ad campaign on motoring. It was always about cycling. So we shot that in COVID, in lockdown, and yeah, it was massively successful. So yeah, some really proud moments, I guess.
You've had an amazing career to date, and then more recently, you've made an interesting transition into a different sector to get some experience. So you moved across to do some work within the charitable sector, and I was really interested as to kind of what you've learned through that process of making that transition from one sector into a sector you've never worked in before.
Yeah, it was really interesting. I mean, I always wanted to do, I always wanted to try and do some work in charity, because I felt before I went in, the commercial element perhaps of some charities wasn't as premium as it could be. You know, there was things that I felt I could bring to the party that perhaps weren't there already. And I initially went into Variety to do some digital and marketing consultancy and sort of get them up and running. And I think one of the things I learned very quickly about charities is resource. You know, you have limited resource. People are trying to do a number of roles. They have small budgets, so you have to make absolutely every penny work. And, you know, at Variety probably wasn't as digital savvy as it could have been. Huge opportunity, brilliant charity, lots and lots of events that were planned. But, you know, I'm looking at it, I was thinking, well, how are we telling people? We're not telling the story. We're not telling the story of the charity. We're not giving people a reason to really engage with us. So I did a lot of work with the team. As I say, it was a small team. They're all trying to do lots of other things, you know, multitasking. And also there's a different goal set. You know, when you're working in retail, it's very much about driving, you know, driving sales, driving the bottom line. And it's interesting to pivot to understand what the KPIs are for a charity, which are quite different. It's about relationship building and engagement, and, you know, looking after your donors, and much more of a focus on storytelling. You know, let's tell people what we do. And I found when I went in there, I used to say Variety is like the best kept secret, you know, on the planet, because it does so much. It's got an amazing opportunity to do more, but we just don't have the resource. We didn't have the skill set. We didn't have the budget to be able to really get out there and tell the story. So I really kind of tried to transform the digital approach, and we became much more digitally savvy. And then really look at the events that we were doing, you know, what's really going to bring in the funding and what's not. I looked at some collaborations with ambassadors, because again, needing ambassadors is important. And then really just kind of trying to define the KPIs. What do we actually really need to be measured about against here? So it was a fascinating journey. I mean, I ended up being there for a year, and you know, eventually ended up as interim CEO, which again was taking on the whole organization. And I was very proud, you know, I feel I left it in a better place than I found it. And then the new CEO came in and has taken it forward. So, but I'm very much in awe. I think charity, you know, when people compare charity and the commercial world and say, oh, it must be much easier. It definitely is not. It's a really hard job, and it's a really, you know, for all those reasons, you haven't got limitless budgets. You haven't got, you know, you can't pay, you know, top money for people. You know, the salaries are obviously naturally lower. So it's much more challenging, actually. It's much more challenging than I thought, but a real joy, and to be part of something that does something really, really valuable, you know, being able to use my skills as a marketeer, essentially, to drive something that then you can see the end result, and it's very tangible. At Variety, you know, we basically raise money to give people things and to make their lives better. And also, I persuaded them, the trustees, that we shot our first sort of brand film, if you like, because that didn't exist, and I wanted to show the breadth of what we did as a charity. So that was really great. I really enjoyed that, and the team really loved being part of it, because they hadn't done anything like that either. So I felt I was able to bring a lot of my skills, but I came away from that learning a huge amount as well.
What a fantastic experience. You know, kind of a new sector, interim CEO. I think that's amazing. Just wanted to ask a bit now about brand strategy, because that is one of your kind of superpowers, is your expertise within brand strategy. You know, we speak to a lot of senior leaders, and, you know, I'm interested, Lisa, when you've written these big brand strategies, how do you then get your key stakeholders on board?
Yeah, it's a real challenge, I think, because there's a lot of misconceptions. When you as a marketeer and you mention the word brand, if you're working in a big ticket organization, for example, everyone groans and like, oh, you know, we haven't got the money to build. We just need to sell some stuff. And so you really have to be able to paint the picture that brand strategy is part of the revenue driving process, right? It's not a nice to have. It's absolutely critical, and it should be part of all of the other elements of the marketing mix. And so I suppose, you know, within Dreams and within Halfords, where it is about driving sales weekly, and it's very, very competitive. My approach really would be, you know, in both of those organizations, it's essential to listen, first of all. So I need to listen. I would always take the approach, right? Listen to what their concerns are. What is the commercial director's concerns? What's the HR director's concerns? What keeps them awake at night? Bearing in mind, we've all got the same purpose. We all want to achieve the same thing at the end, but we might just go about it doing it in different ways. So I'd listen to all of that. And then I felt it was really important to just be very clear in my communication, very transparent, concise about what I was proposing to do, because I need to bring them on the journey. I can't just tell them, you know, this is going to work and trust me. That's not good enough, you know. So I talked to the HR director and say, right, this is my brand strategy. This is how it's going to benefit our people in the organization, whether those people are in stores or factories. Then I talk to the CFO and say, right, this is how much money I'm going to spend, but this is what I'm going to give back to the business, and this is what you're going to make at the end of it. And whether it was retail colleagues, you know, how do I put a roadshow on where I can, you know, tell them what I'm trying to do and bring them along with me on the journey. So that was always quite critical, really, for sort of listening and making sure it really sits with what they're trying to achieve as well. And a lot of it, you know, a lot of it is about showing people that they can trust you and they've got confidence in you. And of course, that's based on your data. You know, you need to provide the data to back up what you're trying to do in a data-driven world. You know, one CFO once said to me not long ago, gosh, this is the first time a marketing director's ever told me how much money I'm going to get back when you spend it. And they'd never been exposed to econometrics. You know, I mean, I introduced econometrics to an organization that, you know, surprisingly hadn't really spent that much time on it. So it's doing those things to really show. But you know, it's tricky in a big organization when people don't really understand the value of brand. As I say, particularly in big tickets, it's hard because you have to keep driving sales every week. And you know, the CFO at Dreams used to say to me, well, that's great, but how many beds am I going to sell? And I'm like, I can't tell you exactly how many you're going to sell this week, but I can tell you if we do this approach and we build our brand, when people are in market, they will come, and they will come for the right reasons, and they will buy with us because there's a purpose to our brand. And thankfully it worked, but there's not many times, you know, I go a lot on my gut instinct as well. And when I don't listen to my gut, sometimes it goes wrong. But it's not ideal to go into a boardroom and say, trust me, you know, my gut says it's all going to work. So you have to be very back up with data, you know, listen to what people's concerns are, bring people on the journey, and go out to the wider audience, you know, particularly in retail, and say, right, this is what I'm going to do. What do you think about it? You know, get that feedback and listen, and then, you know, then take them on the journey. And you know, thankfully that's worked okay for me so far.
That's a winning, you know, approach in terms of managing the key stakeholders. What about your teams? Because you've led some, you've led some very big teams, actually. How do you like to lead your teams through strategic change or transformation? What's your way of leading the teams?
So I would say building and developing teams is probably the most enjoyable part of what I've done over my career. And I always feel quite proud of, you know, whenever I leave an organization, how many of those people either want to come with me or they want to stay in touch. And I love it. And it's that kind of, I guess it's part of the mentoring process. But to go into an organization, you know, you have to instill trust, and you have to be able to make sure they understand that you understand where they're coming from. And in the back of my mind, I always think, whenever I go into a new role or an organization, I'll think, right, what were the things when I was going through this journey that really used to frustrate me, or what do I not want to do that used to drive me nuts? You know, how do I get these guys to, again, get them to come with me on the journey? What's the best way to do that? So I'm always thinking in the back of my mind, right, don't do that. And for example, micromanagement. I mean, everyone hates it. Some, you know, we've all had it, and some of us do it. And I was probably as guilty of that as many, but then I would take myself back and go, gosh, you used to hate this, so stop it. You know, empower people. So try and empower people, try and give them the tools to do, you know, to do the job they need to do, but also try and get them to think a little bit differently, think outside the box. Don't be just in your own lane. You know, there's loads of opportunities, and I've worked in some great organizations where there is massive opportunity. So don't just think about what you do now, think about what you potentially could be doing, and take a bit of a risk. And it's always been a proud moment when I've identified people and thought, you'd be really great at this, so why don't we give you an opportunity to try that, and it will make you flourish and you can spread your wings. So I try and get people out of their sort of natural lane. I try and as well create an environment where people can collaborate and feel free just to, you know, throw out ideas and just be free to think the way that they want to think. And I was like, no, there's no such thing as a bad idea. You know, let's sit around. I used to love brainstorming sessions. I love bringing people together, let them all get all their ideas out on the table. And then, you know, we will ordinarily come out with something that's good, or we've got a germ of an idea that can be great. So I really try and encourage that. And I guess one of the key things that I really try and think about is celebrate success. You know, we don't take enough time to do that. And particularly in the roles I've been in, we are on this treadmill, and it's very easy for me to go, oh no, we need to move on, we need to move on. But to just take a minute and go, that was really good. We did really good there, you know, and I'm, you know, I've always been a big sort of social fan. It's like, right, let's go out and celebrate that, you know, whatever it is, let's do something, let's have an away day, let's get together. Because I just feel it's very tempting to keep on that treadmill and never just take a moment to go, actually, that was quite good. Or how did that go? You know, maybe we could have done something differently. So I always try and celebrate success. It's particularly so in COVID, you know, keeping those relationships going, and just being accessible. You know, for me during COVID, it was absolutely critical when I was so remote to just be accessible. And that's quite hard with a big team, and sometimes probably to my detriment because I was perhaps over accessible. But it's very important for me just to check in on people and say, you know, how are you doing? Never mind what's going on at work. How's life? What's happening? And that just helps people trust you. It helps people to build that relationship. So, you know, I was very conscious of all of that. And I guess probably my final thing I used to say to people was, you know, keep it in perspective. You know, when people used to get very stressed and there used to be a lot of pressure going on, you know, one of my favorite things, you know, I used to say when I was at Dreams is we just sell beds. Okay, so let's not get too worried. So long as we do that, we're not, you know, nothing in life, working life is that important that it should make you feel, you know, ill, or it should make you feel under pressure where it doesn't work for you. So I always try and keep everything and remind people we can't be experts at everything. I'm not an expert in anything. I'm just perhaps a really good generalist. I can bring people together. I can hone ideas, I can train people, I can mentor them, I can encourage them. And I've never been afraid to hire really good people. You know, most of the people I've worked with know more than me about a particular topic. And that's great because I'm learning from them. They're learning from me how to apply it. And I've never been afraid to do that. And that's what creates great teams. And I've been very, very lucky that I've created some amazing teams. And I'd always say, you know, I would not have achieved anywhere near what I have achieved today without having those teams beside me, not behind me. They're beside me, and they're beside me all the way. And I've been so lucky that people have really, really invested in me as I've invested in them. And I think that's, you know, for me, that's what working life is all about, to be able to take those experiences and, you know, and share them and build great teams. And I look at some of the team members that have gone on to do amazing things that worked for me, and that makes me very proud. So I think you should always, you know, it's always about that balance and perspective.
No, you're a great natural leader, Lisa, and I know the teams who've worked with you over the years have all, you know, felt really privileged to work for you, and have learned huge amounts as a result. So we started doing these Q&As originally, actually off the back of COVID, when people were not based in the office as much, and we had our heads of and our rising stars who were saying we don't get access to these chief marketing officers as much as we'd like to right now. So that was the premise behind starting these Q&As. So I always like to ask our guests, what advice would you share now with someone who's looking at you in this sort of level and going, they're setting their sights on a future senior leadership role? What advice would you share?
I mean, firstly, I think that you're right. It's very difficult in this kind of era these days. When I think about when I was starting out, I learned so much from people just talking to them at the photocopier or sitting on the edge of their desk, or, you know, just following them around and listening to what they did. So I really feel for young people coming particularly into a marketing environment, because it is about people. It's about sharing ideas. And that's tough when you're doing a lot of it on screen. You know, I found it quite tough during the COVID time. So I do feel for people. I think to get in, you know, if people are looking to go to senior leadership roles in anything really, it's probably about doing your research, talking to people who are doing that role right now. How did, you know, understanding their journey, what are the good things that you did to get to this, but being really clear about what you think you want to do. And that's about just understanding and sort of learning and research. I think as well, building relationships, you know, as you go through your career, we all naturally build relationships that will benefit us in one way or another. And it might not all be about career, it might be about learning, or it might be about, you know, cultural learnings or whatever. So build those relationships, keep those relationships going as you go through your career, and just remember, you know, what those people brought to your working life, if you like. That will always help you as you move kind of up the ladder, I suppose. Obviously, continuous learning, you know, the world changes so fast, so you have to be, you know, you have to be on your A game. You have to know what's going on in the world. You have to be, you know, happy to keep learning, keep understanding, be, you know, as marketeers, we need to be up with, you know, in touch with the latest trends and the latest initiatives and technology and all of those things. So make sure you know how those things can contribute to whatever that role is that you're aiming for. Say yes to it as much as you can. Just say yes. When someone says, you know, will you do this for me? Can you try this? Don't think about why you can't do it. And this is how I've always tried to be, is just think, okay, I'll say yes, and then I'll find a way. I'll find a way of doing it. And that might be, you know, through working with other people, through reading, through getting, you know, some exposure with an agency. But it's just really, I just found it really useful in my career just to say, okay, I'll have a go at that. I might not be great at it, and it might not actually work, but at least we'll all have learned something. And if you learn something from something, it's not a bad thing. So I definitely say yes more than you say no. And I'd also, for a marketeer, I think what I did was the benefit of having agency experience and in-house experience for me was very valuable, because firstly, you realize where you thrive. And, you know, I felt I was thriving better in an in-house environment, but also having worked in an agency, I knew the value of how agencies could help me. And I think sometimes there's temptation to sort of create a them and us scenario. And I think, you know, I'm in admiration of agency people, always in awe of those great agencies. And so I would say to people, you know, when you get the opportunity to work with good agencies, take it as an opportunity to learn, but more importantly, see them as a partner. You know, try not to have that them and us approach, because I always used to say, you know, we win together and we lose together. You know, we're in it together. And if we can do that together, we will get better results than trying to create this kind of competition, or, you know, trying to be tough and, oh, you know, let's treat our agencies mean, and all that just never ever worked for me. It was one team and we did it together. And I suppose, you know, as you climb up the ladder, you're not going to be everyone's cup of tea. And that's just life. It's like that in anybody's life, right? And I never thought, you know, I just thought I definitely want people to respect me, and that's, you know, respect has to be earned. I'd far rather be respected than be, you know, someone's favorite person. And I think you have to be comfortable with that, because as you do go further up the ladder, you know, you won't appeal to everybody. So long as you're respectful and you're polite and you're kind and you show compassion, and you should always show compassion as you're going up the ladder, because, you know, it's quite easy coming down the ladder as well. I always remember, you know, my dad always used to say to me, long before being kind was a trend, my dad always used to say, it's nice to be nice. And I always have that in the back of my mind, that you can be both. You can be a good leader, you can be successful, and you can be nice to people, you know, and I've always tried to carry that mantra, even when times get tough. So it's just remembering, I suppose, those small things as you gradually go up the ladder, as well as the bigger ambition.
What about mindset? We talk a lot on this, you know, we ask everyone about, I'm a big believer in positive mindset and the power of resilience. And I know you have a very naturally positive mindset. Do you have any hints or tips to share as to how you maintain a positive mindset?
So I'm dreadful at switching off. It's my whole life. I just cannot. I'm very, very bad at it. And I'm also a news addict. And that's very, very bad. So I've recently, one of the things I've done to try and help my mindset is I've turned off the BBC notifications, because that's, it would just ping and ping and ping out what's going on in the world, what's going on in the world. And of course, again, as marketeers, you know, we need to know what's going on in the world. You know, I want to know what's happening. I want to know what the trends are. So I find it very hard. So what I have tried to do recently is I'm always going to make a list. I'm a list maker. If I make lists and then I prioritize, and I get a lot of joy out of crossing things off, saying, right, I've done that, I've done that, I've done that. And that puts me in a really good mindset for the day. I've got my list for the day. I can cross it off. And at the end of the day, I go, great, I feel like I've achieved what I needed to achieve. So that helps my mindset. But I guess more recently, I've just started taking up yoga as well. Which again, you know, anybody that knows me will find that amusing because it's just not really me. And I've always thought, oh, I'll never be any good at yoga. And it's very, very hard. I love doing it, but I force myself. So I put those 2 slots in the week now, and I force myself to go to yoga. And the most difficult bit is the bit at the end where for 10 minutes you have to lie down and do nothing. And you have to, you know, you breathe and you have to switch off your mind. And you know, at first I was like, this is mad. I can't do this. I can't lie here for 10 minutes. But I'm gradually getting better at it. And it's great to just clear your thoughts and just have that 10-minute time where you can't go anywhere. You're trapped and you can't really think about anything. So I found that really, really helpful. And also I started, you know, last couple of years doing a lot more volunteering. And again, that really puts me in a very positive mindset because it puts lots of things in perspective for me. You know, I volunteer for an elderly charity, and you know, once a month we have tea parties and we take elderly people who wouldn't normally get out, they don't have a lot of family, whatever it is, and we go to somebody else's house and they put on a tea on a Sunday, and for 2 hours I absolutely love it, and I forget everything else that is going on in the world that's bad or challenging or work or whatever. And I sit and listen to these amazing people who maybe in their 90s, who've had incredible lives. And I come away and that just feels so uplifted and positive about it. It's probably the best, you know, couple of hours in my month just doing that. And I continue to learn all the time from these people in this generation. So it helps me sort of, you know, I'm naturally curious, so it helps me switch off. So those are the things that I try to do. You try to find things, and do you know, if all else fails, I have a 7-year-old niece, and she will always put everything into perspective for me. So if things become too much, or things, you know, I find that I'm getting a bit too serious, you know, she will just completely bring me down. So that's good as well. Surround yourself with people that are not in your world, and you know, have got other things going on. I find that always helps me.
I think like a 7-year-old niece is a bit of a leveler.
Very much a leveler, yes, very much a leveler.
Put things into perspective. Lisa, thank you. Some fabulous answers. I greatly appreciate your time, and really, really lovely to catch up with you.
Lovely to catch up with you. Thank you.